Emma had always loved Halloween. Since childhood, it had been her favorite holiday, a night when the world filled with magic, mystery, and a tinge of fear. But as she grew older, her feelings toward the holiday changed. Innocent excitement turned into a darker view of the day. It had been years since she'd truly enjoyed Halloween. This year, she decided to stay home, avoiding costume parties and tricks. Emma's house stood on the edge of a small town, where streetlights grew dim and the cool wind tossed fallen leaves into the air. At night, the quiet here took on a foreboding feel, especially in autumn. Her windows overlooked an old cemetery, where it was rumored lay people long forgotten even by their relatives. Settling on her couch with a blanket, Emma picked up a book. But before she could begin, she heard a faint tapping at her window. Her heart skipped a beat. Who would visit at such a late hour? She lived alone, and no one usually disturbed her at this time. She cautiously pulled back the curtain and peered outside. The empty street lay quiet under the moonlight, with only the wind playing in the branches of the trees. Relieved, she dismissed it as the wind's doing and returned to her book. But a few minutes later, the tapping sounded again. This time, it was louder and more insistent. Emma approached the door, feeling her breath quicken. The sound came from the front door. Anxiety surged, but overcoming her fear, she opened it. A boy stood on the doorstep. His figure was barely discernible in the dark. Dressed in an old-fashioned costume, he looked as if he had just stepped out of a long-forgotten celebration. He held no candy bucket, but his eyes, large and sorrowful, looked straight at her. "Help us," he whispered faintly, and a chill ran down her spine. Emma froze, unsure of how to respond. His words came unexpectedly, and her thoughts scattered. Who was he? And what did he mean by us? "Who are you?" she asked, but the boy silently turned and walked down the street, disappearing into the mist. Emma watched him go, unable to move. Something about the scene felt wrong. The next morning, Emma couldn't shake the strange visit from her mind. She was sure the boy was real, but his request and manner of leaving baffled her. No one she knew matched his description, and he'd said, "Help us," as if he wasn't alone. All day, an uneasy feeling grew within her. Something was wrong. Maybe it was just a Halloween prank, or was her subconscious warning her of something? She couldn't let go of the thoughts. She wanted to forget, but the unsettling feeling grew. That evening, as dusk blanketed the town, Emma heard knocking at the door again. This time, she knew she couldn't ignore it. When she opened the door, a small group of children stood before her, 3 boys and a girl, all in antique costumes as though from another time. Their faces were pale, their eyes filled with sadness. "You must help us," the girl said softly, her voice thin and trembling. Emma took a step back, feeling a chill of dread rise inside her. These were not ordinary children. Their clothing, faces, even their voices, everything about them was unfamiliar and eerie. "Who are you?" Emma asked, trying to keep calm. "We are souls, forgotten on this night," replied one of the boys. "We cannot rest until someone remembers us." Emma stood, paralyzed by what she'd just heard. This couldn't be real. But the children stood there, their faces full of fear and longing. "How can I help?" she asked, barely believing her own words. "You must find our names," whispered the girl. "Only then can we be free." Emma couldn't refuse. Something inside told her she had to help these children, even if it all seemed like madness. Their request reminded her of the old cemetery behind her house, a place rarely visited and long abandoned. Many graves there had no inscriptions or were so worn by time that no one could remember who was buried there. The next day, Emma decided to go to the cemetery. She donned a thick coat against the biting wind and took a flashlight. The day was gray, with heavy clouds pressing down on the town. The cemetery greeted her with silence and gloom. The graves, covered in moss and weeds, looked as if they belonged to those truly forgotten. Emma felt a strange tension as she passed by the ancient headstones. Slowly, she walked among the graves, illuminating them with her flashlight. Most were nameless, and those that did bear inscriptions seemed untouched for decades. Then her gaze fell upon one grave. Faintly carved on it was the name Thomas Gray. Died on Halloween night, 1925. Emma gasped. Thomas. The name sounded familiar. She remembered the boy who'd come to her that first night. But his death had happened nearly a century ago. How was this possible? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of soft footsteps behind her. Turning around, she saw the same group of children who had visited her the previous night. They stood at the edge of the cemetery, their eyes full of silent pleading. "You found him," the girl said in a sorrowful tone. "But you must find the others." Emma nodded, unsure of what to say. She felt that these children were more than mere ghosts. They were tied to this world, bound by a mystery she couldn't yet understand. Continuing her search, Emma stumbled upon several more graves. Their inscriptions were nearly erased, but she managed to decipher a few names. Elizabeth, Peter, Sarah. All of them had died on Halloween night, though in different years. It was eerie. So many lives ending on the same day, across different times, all forgotten. Returning home, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into the world of the dead. She felt she was becoming part of their story, as if her fate was now intertwined with these lost souls. Emma began delving into the town's archives. She visited the library, hoping to find any records of the people whose graves she had found, but there was almost nothing. These people seemed to have vanished from history. No one knew why they had died on Halloween, and no one appeared to remember them years later. However, one article from a 1925 newspaper caught her eye. It reported a tragic accident in which a boy named Thomas Gray died. He had perished instantly on his way home from a Halloween party when his carriage overturned. The newspaper mentioned that his parents were inconsolable, but no further details were provided. Yet this didn't explain why these souls were still here. Why were they lingering in this world, asking for help? Emma returned home feeling that she was close to an answer, but something drew her back to the cemetery. She knew something remained unresolved, pulling her back to the graves and the children who still hadn't found peace. When she returned the following day, the children awaited her at the cemetery gates. Their faces were serious, yet they seemed less ghostly this time. They appeared to be a part of the place, but not entirely. "You're close," the girl said, "but there is one last thing. We must be heard." Emma didn't know what else she could do. She recalled all the names, all the lives she'd tried to revive from oblivion. These souls had been forgotten not only by the world of the living, but by themselves as well. "What must I do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Say our names," the girl replied. "Name us so we can go." Standing among the abandoned graves, Emma began to speak the names she'd discovered. Each name echoed across the cemetery, and with each one, the darkness surrounding the place began to fade. When she uttered the final name, silence enveloped everything. The children looked at her with gratitude in their eyes. Their forms slowly faded, dissolving into the air, and as they left, Emma felt the heavy weight on her heart lift.